My name is Still Waters, and these are my stories. I am an experiencer of the phenomenon, an empath, a lucid dreamer, and a high consciousness traveler of other dimensions and alternate timelines that make up our universe. Over the past several years, I have awakened to a state of consciousness that has allowed me to glimpse into my simultaneous lives occurring in this universe. Like pages of a notepad, these alternate timelines are contained and exist simultaneously as one. And like the ink from a felt-tipped pen, my higher consciousness bleeds into these timelines night after night to experience these alternate timelines of my life. I do not pretend to know the purpose of these high consciousness experiences, only that they happen to me every night in full detail, and have decided to start writing them down and sharing them. Step into my world of awakening and enlightenment that I call the Chronicles of Still Waters. The following high consciousness experience you are about to enjoy is called the Alliance on Mars. Last night I awakened in the dream state, having arrived on the surface of the planet Mars. I was standing amongst a group of people on what looked to be a transportation platform. I have no recollection of how I arrived here, only that I had traveled a great distance to bear witness to a major event that was unfolding on the planet. Why this was not happening on Earth instead of Mars perplexed me, but clearly there was a great significance to the location chosen for this ceremony. I did not recognize anyone in the group of people I was standing with, and counted there to be at least 100 people present. From what I grasped in the idle chit-chat happening on the platform, those in attendance had all played a significant role in helping the Earth's citizens transition beyond the third dimension constraints of our planet, and participating in today's celebration was a recognition for all the sacrifices and contributions we had made to making that happen. We had been invited to be part of a historical dedication ceremony for the people of Earth by the Galactic Federation. I was a bit disoriented from my entry into this alternate timeline, but from what I understood, we were going through an orientation process before boarding what looked a lot like a train that would shuttle us to and from the ceremony. Boarding passes for transportation were being handed out for our assigned seat locations, as well as the protocols to adhere to once we arrived on site for the ceremony. The platform we were standing on was below the planet's surface, and we were in a secure location. There were no visible signs of security around us, but I felt like great effort was made to create a buffer zone between us and the safety perimeter established around the delegation of dignitaries present. Being in the presence of these dignitaries, I felt the air I was breathing was well above my pay grade. The air we were all breathing was fresh, and I also did not feel any difference in gravity compared to Earth. The floor and walls of this building looked to be made of a red granite rock. This transportation platform appeared to have been built many years ago and looked like it had never been used due to the state of condition it was in. We were all a bit nervous, a bit anxious, and a bit disoriented about where we were going and what we were about to participate in. As the transportation platform was now fully illuminated, in front of us stood what looked to me like a massive train that gleamed brightly with its luxurious stainless steel exterior. It looked like a missile with its aerodynamic fuselage and recessed lighting, and gave the appearance that it was going 100 miles an hour just standing still. It was noted during our orientation that this transport had been built hundreds of years ago for the journey that we were about to embark on. It had never been used, and we were about to board it for its inaugural trip. We soon began boarding the transport. I recall finding my seat and began to settle in the compartment that sat 4 people quite comfortably. I was carrying a shiny metallic case that I seemed to know was designed to be locked into a specific space near my seat. I did not know the contents in the case, only that it was designated for me, and found it a little unsettling to know that a transport that was built hundreds of years ago for the sole purpose of bringing us to a very specific destination had a compartment specifically to hold the case I was carrying today. I pushed the case into the space near my seat, and it fit so precisely it seemed to blend into the design of the cabin. If it were not for the handle of the case, you would have thought that there was nothing there beside my seat. The level of craftsmanship on board the vehicle was nothing like I have ever seen before. As the delegation found their seats and prepared for departure, the transport began to power up its propulsion system and slowly started to leave the platform. Until now, I could not see any indication of where we were on the planet, the time of day it was, the type of weather outside, etc. The passenger compartments had tiny observation windows. So many of us were excited when it began to move for the view we were about to see. From the sensation of the transport, it felt like it was levitating, which gave off a slight vibrational hum at the slow speed it was traveling. Outside the transportation platform, the landscape was very barren and red. The sky was dark, but the planet's surface was clearly visible. The transportation platform was located just below the surface of a plateau and provided a centralized landing area above it for the spacecraft that brought us to the planet. It provided a commanding view of Mars as we left the plateau and traveled further down in elevation towards the planet's surface. There was no vegetation, no water sources, no wildlife, no buildings, or any visible signs of activity. As far as my eyes could see were red soil, rocks, canyons, and ridges littering the planet's surface. Once the transport cleared the platform, it sped off at a blistering speed. I was amazed at how quickly we accelerated with little to no G-force felt. Questions of how the transport could possibly stay on the track we were riding on, how the tracks could remain clean from the environment they were in for hundreds of years, and why we were using an antiquated rail system to get to our destination filled my head. Couldn't we have just landed at the destination we were going to instead of taking this train? Apparently not. During our ride, it was impressive to see something that had been built hundreds of years ago, that was in pristine condition, being used for the first time, working flawlessly as we sped onto our destination. As we became more settled into our compartments, I was made aware that we were going to a location deep below the surface of Mars, and that was why we were required to board this transport. As we sped on to our destination, the view of the planet's surface disappeared once we entered a tunnel that was camouflaged on the planet's surface. It was then that I realized this train did not require any sort of track system to travel on, and it was merely utilizing the path of an ancient rail system that had been used for the mining activity on Mars by an alien species. This path helped to guide us into a labyrinth of tunnels beneath the surface of Mars that would get us to our destination. As we traveled deeper into the center of the planet, the focus changed from looking outside the transport and the spectacular landscape of Mars to inside the passenger compartment. I was still trying to wrap my head around where I was and where we were going, let alone making introductions to complete strangers. I do not recall the greetings and conversations that went on from this point on the transport, as I can only seem to remember the ceremony that was about to occur. Everything else, such as how I arrived here, who these other delegates were, and who was responsible for handling the logistics in getting us there, all seemed to be irrelevant. As with many of my high-consciousness experiences to alternate timelines of my life, my memories of them tend to get Swiss cheesed when I return to my current waking timeline. A lot of times, if I don't quickly write down my experiences, these memories quickly fade. I once read somewhere that the faintest ink is more powerful than the strongest memory, and boy, isn't that the truth. When we had arrived at our destination, we made our way off the transport and were now standing in a massive cavern that had been bored out from mining activities hundreds of years ago. There was no need to wear any spacesuits or use any sort of breathing equipment, and the temperature in the cavern was very comfortable. We stood near the base of what appeared to be some grand monument that was clearly made to be the focal point of where we were standing. I could not make out what it was in the darkness, as it was being concealed with the absence of light for the great reveal at the conclusion of the ceremony. At the base of this enormous monument, The rock had been cut out in such a way as to provide seating for the guests in attendance, and at the front of these granite benches looked to be an altar. Upon further scrutiny, I realized it was not an altar but a massive dedication plaque for the monument that was about to be unveiled. If its size was in proportion to the size of the monument, it left no doubt that what we were about to see was going to be enormous. This plaque had been covered with cloth for the great reveal, and therefore I had made the mistake of assuming it was an altar for that reason. As the ceremony began, Earth's ambassador for the Galactic Federation addressed the audience brought to this location. He appeared to be human, and when he spoke, his voice was heard telepathically, as I did not hear any sort of echo from being in such an enormous cavern. He welcomed us all to be gathered for this historical moment, to commemorate Earth's achievements that have led us into a new era for humanity. As he continued to speak, he introduced the dignitaries that were among us, as well as those that had not traveled with the delegation to the monument site. Out of the shadows, as he called out one of these individuals, a very large and fierce-looking non-human intelligence stepped forward and stood beside me. You'd think someone would have warned me ahead of time that we would be in the presence of this fierce-looking non-human intelligence and to remain calm. At first, I had a sense of fright at the sight of this creature, but somehow was able to maintain my composure and remain calm in his presence, as my empath abilities did not trigger me to be fearful of this being standing beside me. I think perhaps I was selected to stand closest to this non-human intelligence at the ceremony due to my empath abilities, and to act as a sort of emotional recorder for this event, and pick up the emotional energy from him. This being stood at least 9 feet tall, was very muscular and had a very definitive mass to his body. Even with this non-human intelligence's size and shape, it did not encumber his ability to move or walk. He appeared to be very agile and moved slowly, so as not to startle the delegates before him. Much like the Egyptian god Anubis, his appearance gave off an aura of hardened battle readiness, and his clothing looked more fashionable than tactical. If I had to describe what I was looking at, I would have called him a tank with 2 legs, and I was defenseless from the mere sight of this combat-hardened creature. Clearly his species came from a culture that was no stranger to combat or the art of war. As he stood beside me, the non-human intelligence seemed to be impatient and annoyed, almost like he was wondering why he was called upon to be there. I think perhaps having all the attention of everyone staring at him made him feel a little uncomfortable, even self-conscious. In that moment, Earth's ambassador for the Galactic Federation thanked this non-human intelligence for coming as a representative for his species, and pulled out what looked to be a tiny piece of wood that had the faintest of fire-red color on it. It was, in fact, a microprocessor chip. The ambassador went on to say if it wasn't for this being's ancestors leaving us this clue for us to discover on Earth in the Great Pyramids of Egypt, it would have never led us to Mars, and where we stood today to find one of their spaceships that we learned so much about their advanced technologies. He said the Earth would not have been able to survive on the trajectory it was heading prior to its discovery on Mars. That changed everything for humanity. This tiny microprocessor chip and the subsequent technological discoveries that led us to Mars to find their abandoned spaceship had allowed our planet Earth to advance beyond its wildest dreams, to develop new technologies that has allowed us to become self-reliant on clean zero-point energy systems, create many medical breakthroughs in treating disease and repairing our planet's ecosystem, and break the bonds of our planet Earth effortlessly to explore our solar system and the universe. Above all, this material allowed us to unite our planet and end all wars on Earth, and to come together as one human species and join the Galactic Federation. In honor of this non-human intelligence's species, the ambassador stated that we had created this monument to commemorate and give thanks and respect for this alliance. An alliance that was formed with these beings helped us to save our planet and our civilization from extinction. At that moment, the cavern illuminated to unveil the monument before us. It was an enormous phoenix from Egyptian mythology, with its wings spread wide as it was rising from the ashes. The feathers looked like individual pieces of painted wood in that same red as the chip he held in his hand. Even though it looked like individual wooden feathers that made up these enormous wings, these feathers were chiseled from the cave walls to make the monument. The amount of time and attention to detail put into creating this monument was beyond comprehension. No expense was spared at creating and ensuring this monument would stand the test of time from where it was carved into the heart of the planet. As the monument was illuminated for its great reveal, the cloth that adorned the dedication plaque was removed. On the plaque was an inscription of the speech that had just been made and the date of this ceremony, as well as a listing of all the dignitaries and delegates present for its dedication. There was also a case in the center of the plaque where the ambassador placed the tiny microprocessor chip he was holding. As he placed it into the case, it was sealed permanently into the plaque, and then illuminated a hologram of the spaceship that had been found at this location many years ago above the plaque. The holographic image of the spaceship floated above the commemoration plaque beneath the phoenix and appeared to be clenched in its talons. It was a very formidable sight to see. As everyone cheered and applauded, the non-human intelligence looked up at this enormous phoenix rising from the ashes. He appeared to grin, and I felt he was pleased immensely at the sight of the monument. It was so large that his head moved up and down, left to right, just to take it all in. I sensed that the use of this symbol with Egyptian mythology was deeply rooted in some way to his own ancestors who had created the pyramids on Earth centuries ago, and this struck a very emotional chord within him and for his people that we would honor them in such a meaningful way. If I had to say, I swear the non-human intelligence had a tear in his eye as he looked upon the hologram of the spaceship and thinking of his deceased ancestors. It was very evident by his emotional reaction that we had captured the spirit of their culture with this monument. Perhaps that was why I was present at the ceremony, to remember that experience so I would someday write about it and share it with humans on this timeline. What I had first thought was an angry demeanor from the being was completely not that at all. His fierce appearance had nothing to do with his emotional state. That is just how this non-human intelligence naturally appeared. When I felt his emotions of immense happiness and great pride, through my empath abilities, observed his physical change in his posture and facial reactions that were elicited from the ceremony, I knew his species was benevolent towards humans. It was a very sacred and emotional moment for everyone in attendance, and I felt honored to be able to witness and participate in it. I felt blessed to have had the ability to be able to recall this alternate timeline experience and journal it into this story to share with everyone. It gives me hope in humanity, at least in some other timeline, maybe not the one we currently live in, that we are able to get past our differences and achieve world peace. That we find a solution to our energy crisis, climate change, end disease, and needless pain and suffering on our planet. And that gives us the ability to explore our solar system and discover new life and civilizations in our galaxy and the universe. This concludes my high consciousness experience of the Alliance on Mars. This broadcast and the content is copyrighted, all rights reserved. No part of this media publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written consent of the copyright owner. This publication is a work of fiction. Names, characters, organizations, places, events, and incidents are either used in a fictitious manner or are fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, actual organizations, or actual events is purely coincidental. For rights and permissions, please contact the author.